Good afternoon, everyone, and I'm sorry that I kept you waiting, and at the same time, I appreciate your responding on probably pretty short notice. I'm joined, of course, by the Finance Director of the City of Philadelphia, Rob DeBow, Chief Education Officer for the city, Lori Schur. 2 hours ago, we all heard one of the most chilling statements that I've ever heard a school leader or administrator or superintendent make. With 4 respected principals standing at his side, Superintendent Dr. William Hite was very clear today. He said that if the Philadelphia School District does not have a firm funding commitment by Friday, August 16th for $50 million, and I quote, "We will not be able to open all 218 schools." I'm a lifelong resident of Philadelphia. I do not ever recall such a statement being made unless possibly there was some labor-related issue. That's not the case today. Dr. Hite was unambiguous and very clear. He said, quote, "We can no longer wait." He said it would be, quote unquote, irresponsible to open with the resources that we have. And he said that we in Philadelphia must stop thinking of our schools as a, quote unquote, final thought. Well, I want to be equally clear and direct as well, that we must use the tools that we have at our disposal right now so that our schools can open safely and on time on September 9th. And to do anything less would be irresponsible. Our children deserve better. Our parents deserve better. Our taxpayers deserve better. We have the tools that we have, and we need to use them. It may not be the best tools in the toolbox. They may not be all the tools that we ask for. But at the moment, we have what we have, and you fight another day to get more. From my perspective, a school without year-round guidance counselors, assistant principals, music, sports, arts, and support staff is not a school. I've said this before, and I will continue to say it. That is not a school. It is a building with a principal. Now we know that we'll have one secretary and teachers trying to do their best. That's not a school under any set of circumstances. It's certainly not a place, I would dare to say, that most of us would have considered school when we were of school age ourselves. At the beginning of the summer, the school district and the SRC, as was and is its duty, passed a bare-bones budget without these critical elements that make school a school. And since then, the package was developed that will prevent, and seeks to prevent, the dire scenario from becoming a reality. This package of tools to fund public education here in Philadelphia could help us navigate through this challenging fiscal year while we continue to fight for full fiscal stability. Now, they were not the same tools that City Council and I had proposed here in Philadelphia, but the state funding tools sought to move us forward. And with a month until schools are slated to open on September 9th, I believe that we must work with what we have. And specifically, those are the following items. $28 million that we had already committed months ago from enhanced local delinquent tax collections. $45 million in one-time aid from the state. And as authorized by the General Assembly and signed by the governor, the authority for the city to borrow $50 million on behalf of the school district, which would be borrowed against revenues anticipated from the extended 1% sales tax, which was also approved by the General Assembly and signed by the governor. City Council needs to pass the 1% sales tax extension. We need to know, literally, by the end of next week, August 16th, that that action will be forthcoming. It will provide the $50 million and the other components that I mentioned, will provide vital funds for the upcoming school year. The new tax will also enable us to borrow that $50 million to give to the school district so that it can open schools on time and safely this year. I stand shoulder to shoulder with Dr. Height in saying that we, and certainly I, will not allow schools to open with only the staff that he can currently afford. They will not, in my opinion, be the safe schools that our children and their parents and our teachers and administrators need or deserve. I have a great appreciation for Dr. Height as our superintendent and his daily efforts trying to find out and figure out other alternatives. But I will settle for nothing less than every one of our schools being opened safely and securely, and I want them to open on time as they were scheduled on September 9th. That is what our children deserve. That is what our parents deserve. That is what our taxpayers expect. And that's what we all need to do. No rational adult who cares about children would ever subject them to the reality of a school without the necessary and needed supports that would provide for a safe environment, knowing that what we have right now is inadequate. It is not right, it is not fair. Imagine a high school of 2,000 to 3,000 students with one principal and one secretary. That is not a safe environment, and everyone knows that. Without immediate action and a commitment from our City Council, our schools will be unsafe if they attempted to open with the presently known staffing in September. Time is running out for action and commitment. According to Dr. Height, we have until August 16th, next Friday, to figure this out. And I fully appreciate that a variety of other ideas have been offered. And we've explored them. And certainly we'll always look at any idea that is proposed. Unfortunately, they just don't work with the time allotted, the decisions that need to be made, the recalls, if they were to happen, that have to take place, and there are many outstanding questions about many of the ideas that have been proposed versus the reality and the fact that a very straightforward and a simple yes by a collection of elected officials here in Philadelphia is the most straightforward, uncontested, and known path to providing an immediate $50 million for the opening of schools on time and safely in September. And certainly we should continue to work with our colleagues in the governor's office in Harrisburg on a variety of other ideas or changes or things that need to be fixed. And those measures can be taken up, and I expect will be taken up. And I will certainly be fighting for them to be taken up when the General Assembly returns in late September. But our children are expecting to go to school on September 9th, way before the General Assembly gets back in session. Now, there's also been talk about using possibly the city's fund balance to support our schools. One, let me be very clear about what the city has done over the past few years. Since FY10, the City of Philadelphia has put over $100 million additional funding forward with the support of City Council to educate our children, while other funding sources have significantly declined. With regard to further utilizing general fund dollars, tapping into the city's fund balance puts our own city finances in serious jeopardy. We simply cannot afford to go on that path. Indeed, just yesterday, we saw evidence of the need to keep city funds on hand with the Common Pleas Court judge's decision about health care costs related to our city firefighters. No more distractions. We have no time to waste. We need to get this done now. And if, as Dr. Hite has said, he can get a written promise from a majority of members of City Council that they will support passage of the sales tax bill as quickly as possible upon their return to session next month, then the city will immediately take steps forward to create the loan vehicle and get those dollars to the school district, give Dr. Hite and the SRC the security that they need to start the rehiring process, and bring back many of the laid-off school staff so that our schools can open on time and safe, on time and safe, on time and safe, on time and safe. Those two items have to go together. And upon that action, we would then be secure in the idea and the notion that we will eventually have the resources from the sales tax to repay the city for the $50 million loan. As mayor and as a parent, I cannot watch the resources for our children to get whittled away year after year after year after year. And essentially, the bar is lowered for what constitutes school, what a school is, and what a school means, and what a school can do year after year after year after year. It needs to stop. These are adult issues that negatively affect the futures of our children. Let me remind everyone where this conversation started a year ago. A $304 million budget gap that needed to be addressed. And so while we're focused today on the immediate need for a $50 million loan backed by the sales tax, it's required, it's needed to make sure the schools open on time and safely, we are nowhere near close to securing all the funding necessary to make schools look like the kinds of schools that our children truly deserve. $50 million will certainly help us to open the doors on time and safely. But what's on the other side of that door is still inadequate and is still a question that adults need to answer. Additional funding can only come from the actions of a variety of stakeholders who have yet to contribute to a collective solution for our schools. I want to emphasize that our labor unions still play a huge role in shaping what schools can look like this fall. Let's go back through the initial request and the ideas that Dr. Hite and the SRC put on the table months ago. $60 million request for additional funds from the City of Philadelphia. $120 million in additional funds requested from the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. And savings through contract negotiations with a variety of labor unions in the amount of $133 million or so. That was the initial package on the table. And while the city and Commonwealth together have not, in my view, completely and fully and totally met the requested dollar amounts, we're significantly close with a path to get us there. On the labor side, these are essentially the only adults at the table who have so far yet to financially contribute to a solution for this crisis. Virtually everyone else has done something. Children have paid a high price. Parents have paid a high price. Other school district labor unions and central office staff, taxpayers, property owners, the city, all stepping up. Everyone has put something on the table, and our labor unions must do the same. It is time for the PFT to step up in a similar fashion. For every dollar of help that we get from savings in the PFT contract, more adults will return to our school buildings, ready to provide a quality education to our children. More children will be able to receive year-round athletics and art and music programs and have access to guidance counselors, critically needed, especially for juniors and seniors in high school, to help them on their future educational path. In short, but very directly, I'm calling on our friends, the PFT, to be a partner in the fight to save our children and to work with the district to provide the dollars that are necessary in savings to help ensure a high-quality education. But for today, we must focus on the $50 million in loan proceeds that our children need in order to go to school on time and safely on September 9th. Time is not our friend. Time is running out. The state has given us some tools. We must use them. We must spend every day and every possible moment that we can from this moment forward to reach an agreement here in the city on this funding that puts our children first. And that requires adults to act now, support the extension of the state sales tax given to us by the Commonwealth to support the funding for our children's education. And if City Council and a majority of members are ready to commit to support that sales tax legislation approved in Harrisburg, and as Dr. Hite asked today, I am certainly ready to sign that letter of support right now. This is a critical moment for adults to stand up for children. I'd be glad to take any questions from the news media.
Why now are you making this call for everyone to stand up for children? How come not a few weeks ago, a couple of weeks ago? Why a week out when it's so urgent?
Well, Jan, I think what you may not know is that these conversations and discussions about this particular issue have been going on for some time. They haven't taken place in public. Often it's that much more difficult to have that kind of discussion in a public venue. But I want to disabuse you of any idea that the elected officials, both the folks who directly represent the city or city elected officials and our state elected officials, have been in these discussions for some time. Dr. Hite, though, made a very important statement today, and we are a week out, and so I believe it is that much more important to bring greater attention to this issue. Again, you may have missed, but I've been talking about this for some time in a variety of ways. Some have paid attention to it, and others have been writing about whatever they've been writing about. But this is a critical issue. I have been talking about it for a while, and other elected officials have been talking about it, but we are a week out from the time when Dr. Hite needs to make a recommendation to the SRC, and we need to wrap this up. Next question.
What good does some sort of letter of support do for you, considering it's not binding and council's not even in session and anything can happen once they come in?
Well, I think as Dr. Hite pointed out, and I would certainly point out, that if a majority of members indicated by way of a letter or their signatures or however else it gets communicated, if the members and myself say that we're going to support this, then Dr. Hite is then in a position to actually start the process. He will take our word at that point and count on those dollars to then start to bring people back. So he doesn't need, I'm sure he'd love to have, but I think in essence what he said is, if you all make that commitment, I don't have to have the dollars in the bank tomorrow, but I can start the process of bringing people back based on the commitment of those elected officials and the credibility of their word.
Well, Council President Clark's office has said, we're going to pass the sales tax. And furthermore, they said they don't think that they want to split with a bigger split with the pensions would affect your ability to go to the markets and borrow the money.
Well, I did read that in the newspaper. I think what Dr. Hite has said, that, and certainly for us on the city side to actually do a borrowing, you need to know that it is actually going to happen, that individuals who have to ultimately make a vote have affirmatively stated that they're actually going to vote on a piece of legislation. That does not exist at the moment, which is why I assume earlier today Dr. Hite asked if he could get that commitment from a majority of members, and certainly myself. I'm prepared to support that effort, but I can't pass a piece of legislation.
And Mayor,
Mike? Mike?
Well, I'm actually following on Jan's question. Implicit in your answer to Jan that you've been having private discussions with council about this for weeks now.
Council and members of the General Assembly.
I'm sorry?
Council and members of the General Assembly.
But in terms of getting this assurance, why have your private discussions thus far failed to result in the assurance to the point where you're now forced to, in essence, put public pressure on council to move forward?
Well, certainly that was not my intention, not my goal, not my interest. As I mentioned in my remarks, there are a variety of ideas that are floating around. There's a portion of the Council President's concern that we're in the exact same place. The original idea, whenever that may have initiated, around the sales tax was first that bulk of the sales tax, if it were going to be extended, which was kind of not an active public conversation, but if it were going to be extended, that the bulk of those proceeds would go to the pension fund. Then there were subsequent conversations once the matter moved to the General Assembly and the governor's office, and there was discussion about the prospect of a split, possibly even 50-50. Certainly on my side, because we had other proposals for how to fund schools. So on my side of that, it would certainly be my preference to send the bulk of the sales tax dollars to the pension fund, which is 48-49% funded. Schools were not a topic of conversation at that time because we had other financing ideas for schools. Then it was, there were discussions about a 50-50 split. I said, well, you know, schools need the money, pensions need the money, but you know, you don't always get what you want. It was very late in the process, and this was not my idea and not the council president's idea. But ultimately, we were basically kind of presented in the lateness of the budget process in Harrisburg with really not so much I would call a deal, but a reality of where Harrisburg was on the many items that we were looking at, whether it was cigarette tax, which did come, again, through City Council, 16-0, but did not move in Harrisburg. The whole idea, which really, you know, almost came out of nowhere, about the $45 million, which was left over from, you know, some possible debt that the state has with the federal government. But lastly, it was also becoming very clear that no significant additional, regular, stable, annual funding was coming from the Commonwealth. And then we were, as I mentioned, presented with the reality that all of the sales tax, or a significant, almost all of the sales tax, was now going to be sent for schools. My reaction to that was, A, that's not what we were initially talking about. B, I'm not thrilled about that idea. But C, I need to make sure the school's open and that we have a stable funding source for schools. And as committed as I am to figuring out a significant funding mechanism to bolster our pension fund, schools are right now. The pension crisis certainly is upon us, but it's not going to happen on September 9th. And so that's just kind of one of those situations where you end up where it's really not a choice, it's not a proposal, it's not a deal, it's this is what you're getting. And at least in my line of work, some days you have to take what's being offered. The General Assembly will come back in September. I think we should continue fighting for the cigarette tax. Again, passed 16-0 by City Council, doesn't cost the General Assembly a dime, and generate some pretty significant dollars. If we can fix the sales tax legislation that was passed to get a split of those proceeds, 50-50, 60-40, either way it goes, I'd support that as well. But the General Assembly doesn't come back until September 23rd. Kids go to school on September 9th. And so I'm willing to engage in all of these battles. But I am first and foremost focused on the fact that schools need to open on time and safely on September 9th. And the only real direct mechanism in our control, sitting right in front of us, given to us by the General Assembly and the governor's office, whether we ask for it or not, is the ability to borrow and use sales tax money as the funding source, which ends up not costing the city any money. That's where we are. I mean, that's what happened. So it's not always pretty, but it is what it is, and we have to use what we have. Yes, ma'am.
Were you saying in your reference to the PFT that thus far in negotiations they've refused to give any concessions? And do you want them to stop the clock?
I didn't say that at all. I'm not at that table. Well, they don't have an agreement. And so until we know what the agreement is and who's put what on the table and you can calculate those savings, you can't count them. And at the moment, there is no agreement, and we don't know the value of any potential savings because they haven't reached agreement on anything. And that contract expires at the end of the month.
In this letter that you want from majority council members expressing support for the sales tax extension, do you want them to?
Dr. Hyde asked for a letter.
Okay.
I didn't ask for a letter.
All right, well, in this letter, is Dr. Height asking and you asking council to pass it as it's come out of Harrisburg with $120 million going to the schools and not some other form of splitting the pensions?
You know, I think, you know, I think on that point, you know, we could certainly try to craft a piece of legislation that on the sales tax that both passes it while at the same time potentially anticipates the possibility that the General Assembly might give a different split, and should they do that, and you incorporate that idea, that concept, that should the General Assembly do something later down the line, you know, the split will change, you could put that in a piece of legislation right now and pass that. That happens from time to time. That's, I think that concept or that idea is probably in even the cigarette tax legislation. There may be a section that says if the General Assembly approves, you know, the cigarette tax, because right at the moment we don't have that authority, but if they approve it, this tax will go into effect. I mean, that happens, you know, from time to time. So you could try to do something like that. But at the moment, the legislation came out of Harrisburg the way it came out of Harrisburg. I think if we, you know, do anything without additional caveats or that kind of thing, you could possibly jeopardize it.
Mayor, you mentioned that this conversation started a year ago. Why has it taken so long for our leaders from here to Harrisburg to find a solution when schools just a couple
Well, what I said started a year ago was really more the obvious idea that there was a significant financial challenge that the school district was going to face in the upcoming year. It became crystallized, I guess, probably somewhere in the April-May time period when the superintendent announced what the number was, the 304. But I think we've all known for a while that there was going to be a pretty big number. From there, a variety of ideas were put forward. I think you all were assembled outside my office when we announced the $95 million proposal out of the city. A couple weeks later, legislation came through to deal with that and try to take on the challenges in Harrisburg. You know, budget cycles and big budget items tend to get settled pretty much late in the process. We didn't pass our budget until sometime in June. And the General Assembly, I think, went right up literally to the last almost hour or so of June 30th. So, I mean, it's all about the details and how it all fits together. And when you're at another legislative body trying to make something happen, again, you don't always get everything that you want, or if you get something, it may not come in the form that you prefer or like. It's life in the big city. But we have this particular tool. We need to use that tool as best we can. So, thanks.